So we got a book review for you. This one right here. The Billionaire's Island Bride by Donna Alward. This is the book that I started to read and then I stopped when I was on the phone with the Harlequin Reader Service. She said, give it another chance. I guarantee you, if you keep with it, you'll see a reward in that book. So she was right, because look at all the points of light I want to share with you regarding this book. But I'll read the back to you. I'll read the note from the author, and then we'll go from there. She can't resist him, but can she trust him with her heart? Brooklyn Graves' blissfully peaceful, if solitary existence is threatened when billionaire Cole Abbott wants to buy her corner of their shared private island. She'll never sell. But she quickly comes to enjoy sharing intimate evenings and even more intimate secrets with Cole. And what Brooklyn soon realizes she wants from Cole is something money can't buy: his love. This is a South Shore Billionaires novel where you can be swept away by glamorous and heartfelt love stories by the Harlequin romance series. Like I began to say, when I started reading this book, I thought it was too much far-fetchedness. Who could own an island, let alone a corner of an island, and feud over such a thing? But then you get to looking at the bigger picture, and when you do, and you see that it's not so much about the island, but there's other issues at hand, you can start to be like, okay, I can see the other issues, but I still can't see owning an island. But anyway, we're going to do a book review. Dear reader, there are times when bits of my real life trickle into my books. That's certainly the case with the Billionaire's Island Bride. As I was writing this one, a hurricane came up the east coast in Nova Scotia and got a direct hit. Our power was out for nearly 3 days. Thank goodness for our generator in that time. I did a lot of reading by either lantern light or the one lamp we plugged in. The generator doesn't run the whole house, but it kept our fridge and freezer running. Food, wine, and a good book. What more does one need, really? The other element in this book that touches home for me is Marvin, the dog. We lost our beloved Dreamer, a Nova Scotia duck trolling retriever, in 2018. But there's something so perfectly joyous about a rousing game of fetch, or petting soft and silky ears, or just knowing there's a dog next to you when you're having a rough day. Thank you, Peanut. That was perfect timing, actually. We're thinking it might almost be time to add another pup to our family, but we're unsure of how the cats are going to feel about it, of course. I hope you enjoy the final story in the South Shore Billionaires trilogy. Happy reading, Donna. Ironic, isn't it? Her first name's the same as mine. A little bit about the author. She lives on Canada's East Coast. Her heartwarming stories of love, hope, and homecoming have always been translated into several languages, hit bestseller lists, and won awards. But her favorite thing is hearing from her readers. When she's not writing, she enjoys reading, of course, knitting, gardening, cooking, and she is a masterpiece theater addict. You can visit her on the web, DonnaAlward.com, and join her mailing list at DonnaAlward.com newsletter. To Dreamer, the Best Dog. That's the dedication of the book. Page 38. I guess, there was little blips along here and there. Why did I mark page? Oh, I marked page 37 and 38. Okay, we started in at 37. The previous owners and I got along well, she admitted. Before that, my grandparents owned the whole island. But then my grandfather got sick and needed a lot of care. He couldn't get here on the island, of course, and it put a financial strain on them. Ernest bought it, minus the parcel of land, and rented the house for 2 years before he built the grand house on the bluff. He set up the conditions for the shared dock and made sure we were taken care of. I understand why he sold, but it was a good relationship built on trust. She met his gaze evenly. You haven't built up that trust. Yet, he said, and didn't smile. He seemed... Page 38. To be taking everything she said very seriously. Maybe if I tell you my plans for the property, it'll put your mind at ease. Moving forward, page 51. Any time her face softened, she patted Brooklyn's hand. Look, I don't just want you to be happy, and I know you don't need a man for that. Just don't. I just worry about that. I just worry that you've closed yourself off to possibilities because of what happened. Dell was one of the few people who really knew about Brooklyn's trauma. Being a victim of a violent crime had changed Brooklyn, made her more wary and less trusting. Sure, she'd done all sorts of therapy and she was doing well, but she also built her life the way she wanted it and didn't like disruption. She had enough counseling to understand that she liked guarantees. She wasn't a risk taker, and in her mind, love was the biggest risk of all. It's not that, Dell. She took a sip of her tea and sighed. I mean, I'm not physically afraid of a relationship. The assault hadn't been sexual. It had been straight up robbery. And looking back, it seemed like something from a movie. It certainly felt like it had happened to someone else. The fear had been cold and debilitating. The hard press of the gun into her ribs, that she could still feel the painful grip of his big hand on her arm. For a few terrified moments she'd been his hostage, but when he got into the car, she managed to scramble out the passenger side and he sped off. She'd been safe, yet forever altered. No, sweetie, Delilah said gently. Delita. You're afraid of living. Everything happens in good time, but sometimes people come along that shakes us up a bit. She smiled. Maybe this guy is going to shake you up a bit. He already had. He likes Marvin, and Marvin liked him back, that traitor, she confessed. Then again, pats and treats go a long way with dogs. Delilah grinned. Not just with dogs. I'm partial to pats and treats myself. Delilah! Brooklyn started to laugh and put down her teacup. Delilah had been married to the same guy for 15 years, and they were still adorable together. This is why I love you. And here I thought it was because you get a bulk discount at the store. I'm nicer than that. I know that, page 53. I hope you do. Anyway, if this guy isn't going to be on the island much, why not have a thing or see where it goes? God knows you deserve it. Brooklyn had gone home to recover, to really, and that was the trauma from those 5 minutes in her life that had resulted in a crippling fear and panic. Life was much better now, but she didn't like change. Didn't want it. Even one as sexy and intriguing as Cole Abbott. Moving forward. Big skip here. Page 72. All too soon he shifted back, not wanting to press his case or go too fast. There was something fragile about her he couldn't put his finger on. Oh, she wouldn't break. She was a strong, stubborn woman. But there was something else, a vulnerability that he sensed in her sweetness and hesitation. That's the only paragraph I have marked. Moving forward. Page 76. Her cell rang and she reached over to grab it, looked at the number and frowned. It was a number that she hadn't recognized at all. Hello? Hey, Brooklyn, it's Cole. You got my number? She wasn't sure if she was pleased or not. I got it from Jeremy, my realtor, who had it because of, when I was trying to buy your house from under you. She laughed out loud at his bluntness. Fair enough. What's up? He was calling her. It shouldn't make her giddy, but there was a whole list of shouldn'ts where Cole was concerned, and she had so far ignored every single one of them. Moving forward. That was page 76, 77, by the way. Okay, page 87. Did you have a decorator? Yes, he led her up the stairs. I brought in someone from New York. I think he did a good job, don't you? It fits the island and you, too. I loved it when Ernest lived here, but this is even better, I think. I'm glad you approve. She looked up at him. Oh, get real. You don't really care if you have my approval or not. He tilted his head and met her gaze. You know, that shouldn't be true, but lately I find myself caring about what you think very much. Cole, I'm just saying, somehow I don't want to disappoint you. Where is this going? We feel the attraction, but how deep is the attraction? Page 91. Everyone laughed a little bit, and then Branson said, that's not in the cards for you, is it, Cole? Cole. I can't say this guy's name right. I'm sorry. Unease settled in Brooklyn's stomach. She was here at Cole's date, after all. She tried to keep a relaxed posture, even though the question seemed rather pointed and did and didn't involve her at the same time. But Cole just shrugged easily. Dude, you know me. I have too much going on. Even if I have slowed down a bit, you and Jeremy can carry that flag. The single life works for me. Jeremy's gazed into Tori's eyes. I'm definitely okay with that. Me too, Brand said, leaning over, kissing Jessica's temple. It was too obvious to Brooklyn that the other two couples were deeply in love. What in the world was she doing here? It had become horribly awkward. She suddenly felt like nothing more than a seat filler. That was page 91. Moving on. Page 94, 95, 96, and 97. It was clear that Cole could have been fine without a dinner partner, so why had he invited her? Why had he kissed her in her grandmother's porch? What did he even want? She knew what his purpose for the island was, but that was all. That was professional, and perhaps a little personal, but she had no idea what his motives were. And yet she didn't believe he was playing games either. He didn't seem like the cavalier type. Maybe she should ask him. But not now, not just when his guests were curled up on their expensive furniture. I really should be going, she said with a smile, but thank you for inviting me for such a lovely dinner. I don't need to eat now for a week. Cole looked up at her, a frown appearing between his eyebrows. So soon? It's only 9. Page 95. I've got to get up early in the morning. This time of year I start getting a lot of orders and I don't want to fall behind. You must be getting a lot of holiday business starting, Tori said. How do you keep up? Don't you worry about having carpal tunnel after knitting so much? So far, so good, Brooklyn replied. But yes, this is a really busy time of year. It was so nice meeting all of you and joining you for dinner, though. And she meant it. She felt awkward, but it wasn't because of anything anyone said or done. Not really. It was just an awareness that she lived in a world that was foreign to her. Or that they lived in a world that was foreign to her. I'll call Dan to run you down, Cole said. No, please don't. It's a beautiful night and I'll walk. I'll walk you then. She was aware that the other two couples were hanging on their every word. It's okay, Cole. You can stay with your guests. Oh, we're fine, said Tori lightly. We can spare him for half an hour. See? She wasn't going to win, and to protest further would only make it look more awkward. All right, then. They headed out into the evening with the sun down and the moon rising. The air had taken on a distant chill, and she hadn't thought she needed a jacket over her sweater, but it was colder than she expected, probably because the sky was perfectly clear with a blanket of brilliant stars above them. This is page 96. Wow, Cole said, pausing on the gravel in the front of the house. You can see forever when there's no light pollution. Right, she hugged her arms around herself and tilted her head to stare into the darkness. There are a million stars tonight. He was closer to her than she realized, because when he spoke again, she jumped, startled by the nearness and how soft his voice was so close to her ear. Stars make me feel both incredibly small and also like I belong to something vast. That probably doesn't make sense. But it did make sense to her. She often felt the same. When my brother and sister and I were kids, we used to lie on the sand and stare up at the stars. She laughed at that memory come rushing back. My mom hated it because we always ended up with sand in our hair and bites from the sand fleas on our legs and arms. It was my grandma who washed out all the little grains of sand and put calamite lotion on when we would scratch. She turned her head and looked up at him. There was a small smile on his face, but his eyes seemed sad. What? She asked. Nothing. I just never did anything like that as a kid. Of course, I didn't have any brothers or sisters either. Brooklyn thought it sounded unbearably lonely, and those kinds of memories were something not even privilege could buy. Then come on, she said impulsively, taking his hand and pulling him off the gravel path. Page 97. Okay, we're going to move forward. Page 100. I'm trying to find why I marked page 100. You ever do that? You mark it and then you're like, why did I mark it? No, of course I'm the only one that does that. Okay, it looks like we're going to read until page 104. Oh, do you know the constellations? Not really, she replied. She slid her fingers away and he missed the contact. I mean, I know the big and the little dippers, but the rest I like making things up instead, kind of like when you see shapes in the clouds. I like to find them in the stars. God, she was so pure, wasn't she? How many women had he met in his lifetime who would indulge in such a bit of whimsy to make up their own constellations? It struck him that maybe he'd spent a lot of time with the wrong sort of woman, and wondered if it was because of the example set at home. His mother had not been a nurturer. It had been something that he and Jeremy had in common. Jeremy had a stepdad, and Cole still had his father, but his father had been barely around. His first love had always been Abbott Industries, and when his will had been read, his instructions to his son was, "Please don't ruin my company." Nothing about being happy or finding love, and when Cole had looked at his mother's impassive face at the cemetery, he wondered if they'd ever even loved each other at all. He let out a long breath, wishing he knew how to let go of the past, but it popped up now and again, and more often than lately. He couldn't imagine living in a loveless marriage, or worse, loving someone only to have them stop loving you, especially when you weren't really that loving to begin with. That was a deep thought kind of sigh. "You okay?" He felt her gaze on his profile and stared at the stars. "Yeah, I'm fine, just thinking." "What about?" This is page 101. "My family." He debated whether or not he should say any more. He didn't talk about his personal life, but there was something about Brooklyn that invited him to be open. "My mother never would have done this, either. Neither would my dad, to be honest. I'm not even sure why they had me. I spent my whole life trying to gain their approval, or rebelling, he never getting it, now it was too late anyway." "Even for your mother? I know your dad is gone, but she's still living, right?" Page 102. "Yeah, we don't have much of a relationship. She wasn't very maternal." "I see. I spent a lot of time looking for validation and not enough time actually living. Being here on the island has hammered that home, and sometimes I'm not sure what to do with it. It sounds like you made a lot of life changes after your health scare." "Let's just call it what it is. I had a breakdown. Of course, it was all kept super quiet, because if it had gotten out, Abbott's stock would have plummeted." "That's a lot of pressure to put on a single person, Cole." He didn't answer, because she was right. "So what are you going to do, walk away?" "No," that he was able to answer definitely. "I do know I have to stop being self-destructive. Being a workaholic is not an answer, but I still need to have a purpose and a reason to be busy. I just can't hide away here. It's nice for a little while, but not forever." "Balance. Yeah, it's one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, but for me it means making sure I take a time out and I don't burn out, that I don't have to do everything myself. It sounds like it should be easy, but when you've lived that way your whole life, habits are hard to break." And that's where we stop on that part. Moving forward. So we see that these two are getting somewhat close, and that Starlight was funny. A funny thing, because for the first time in forever she'd forgotten to feel threatened, forgotten to be cautious. On page 111. On page 120. He tried to think about her down here all alone. If things got scary, she was a big girl and could take care of herself. But damned if he didn't want to. Why did he keep having that impulse? Like I said, these rarely happen in the real world. I think that's why, I don't know, you could say it never happens in the real world. Maybe you've been hurt too many times. I don't know. Maybe it's a mix of things. Maybe it's life in general. But, this book, when I started reading it, and she's really like a hermit in her own little way, wanting her own piece of the island, not to be bothered. He owns the majority of the island. He was unable to purchase that part from her. So therefore, it's like you have a good versus, I don't want to say evil, maybe good versus good, for their own reasons. And it's discovered later on throughout the book. Page 132. But he liked Brooklyn more than any woman he ever met. There was something so real about her, and he never questioned her motives. She was unfailingly honest and authentic, with no hidden agenda. And right now a wild storm was raging outside, and she was holding on to his hand for dear life. He knew he should be cautious, that he should not want to get involved in whatever personal things she had going on. but she was also letting him in, and there was something addictive about knowing someone trusted you enough to share a secret. It wasn't something that he was used to. It was also something he usually avoided, but with Brooklyn it felt oddly safe. He rubbed his thumb over her hand and encouraged her to go on. This is page 133. I was home for the weekend, and I went into the liquor store to buy a bottle of wine for my mom and me. We were going to have a wine and movie night because I was heading into finals and needed a downtime to chill. So I'm waiting in line with my wine, and this guy comes in, and I didn't think anything about it. I barely even noticed him. And then he walked up to the cashier in front of me and pulls a gun out of his jacket. "My God," Cole exclaimed. "In a town that small, does that sort of thing happen often? I mean, I kind of pictured a crime rate about 0. "Bad things happen everywhere," she whispered. "I'm sorry, go on." She hesitated but waited. Not that he wanted to pressure her, but he got a feeling she needed to say it. Marvin let out a whine. Page 134. And nudged her leg and reached down with her other hand and patted his head. "Thanks, Marv," she murmured. "Okay." Her voice strengthened. "We all did what he said. We didn't move. The cashiers gave him the money, but they also hit the panic button. And once he had the money, he started to freak out, so he grabbed me and dragged me outside with him." Cole swore. She'd been part of an armed robbery. No wonder she was skittish. And see, I'm going to take a break there again. We all have things in life that have influenced us, whether it's positive, negative, or even scares us from taking chances in life, or makes us our own worst enemy in life. And, I think that's one reason that Brooklyn was so secluded in this little part of her own island, because she didn't like change, and she didn't want to be a part of change. She just wanted things to continue on. She just wanted that house, the main house, to be uninhibited, and she wanted just to live in her own kind of world, if you will. Okay. His car was outside. I dropped my bottle of wine and broke everywhere. Had a piece of glass at the top of my foot. He opened the driver's side door, shoved me in. After I got in, there was a split second where I froze, but then I remembered watching a show and hearing the one thing you should never do is go to a second location with someone. So I unlocked the door and jumped out, hoping he wouldn't use the gun. He didn't. He took off, and I was left there on the sidewalk. She was trembling now. So he slid closer and folded her arms in his. "You're safe now," he said gently, and kissed her hair. His heart hurt for her. What a terrifying ordeal. "You were smart and did everything right. That's what the cops said. I was able to give a good description and a partial plate." He was arrested shortly after. "So you got Marvin?" "Not at first. I went through all the victim services stuff, some counseling, but I was really struggling. Left school, which I still regret sometimes. Eventually I got Marvin, and then I came over to the island for a few days to get away. It was the first time I felt peace in months, so I asked if I could move over here for a while. 2 years and counting, and I'm still here. My grandmother deeded me the property so it would be in the family, but she wouldn't have to deal with it. Marvin's been with me throughout all of that." Cole held her close, and he was gratified to see that she'd stopped shaking. "He's quite a dog," he said, "and you're quite a woman." Oh, this man is just too much. This is page 135. I guess we're going to read all the way through 138. Good gravy. "I ran away. That's not so remarkable. Heck, I still fight a lot of panic when I go into town. Waiting in line anywhere is torture, and I have a handful of places I like to go, and that's it. I'm still horribly afraid. You also live on an island by yourself, run your own business, and you're competent and a person as I ever met. Maybe certain situations trigger you, but I promise you they don't define who you are. The way you stood up to me when I first arrived." She laughed. A sound of thick emotion. "Oh, Cole, I thought I was going to throw up the whole time." This is page 136. "But this place means so much to me. There was no way I was going to give up without a fight." He thought for a moment, then he turned a bit and made her face him. "You listen to me," he said. "You were brave. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. There is nothing I respect more, Brooklyn, and I'm honored that you share it with me." Honored and a bit terrified, but he'd work through that. She looked down and bit her lip. He didn't want to make her cry, but couldn't she see how remarkable she was? "What were you taking in school?" "Chemistry. I was trying to get into the pharmacy program." He grinned. "Smarty pants." She smiled finally. "Whatever." The wind howled and around the windows, and Cole realized at some point it had gotten dark outside. "Looks like we've stormed in now for sure." he commented. "I'm glad you came. I'm glad that my house is a place that makes you feel safe." She turned her liquid eyes to his and said simply, "You love my dog. That's my first litmus test." Page 137. Did he? Did he love Marvin? He looked down at the yellow fur and big brown eyes and realized he did, in fact, love this dog. He was friendship and loyalty and all love wrapped up into one four-legged package. He was the friend Cole had wanted his whole life, and Cole was even more glad that Brooklyn had him to keep her from being lonely. Maybe moving the island had been a bit extreme reaction on her part, but she'd been through something rather extreme. Who was he to judge? After all, he wasn't the king of perfect life choices, was he? "Ray and Dan will be coming over soon for dinner. You don't mind, do you?" Her face brightened. "No, not at all. I like them both very much. It was one of the reasons I came up here today. I kind of like the thought of, well, everyone together." "Me too," he said, and he realized it was true, that Raylene and Dan were employees, but they were much more than that to Cole. "Hey, Cole." He looked and turned her face. Her tears had been dried, but it remained steady, piercing blue, reached in and grabbed him from the day one, when he expected a little old lady and was met with her instead. Page 138. Thank you for listening and for letting me get the idea of and for letting we're going to start at the top. Thank you for listening and for letting go of the idea of buying me out. It means a lot. "You're welcome," he said, unsure of what else to say. He never agreed to let go of that desire to purchase her property, but now that she said it, he knew he could not pursue her to sell and take away her safe place, even it was a place to hide. Everyone had a right to hide if they wanted to. He looked around the huge living room. Even him. Moving forward. Page 155. Cole knew it was no problem. He paid handsomely for the service, but he admired Brooklyn's kindness and courtesy. She appreciated people, and he liked that about her. Dr. Thorpe came out and met them at the door. For the first time, Cole didn't have to lift Marvin. Cole was in good shape, but 80 pounds of deadweight dog was a challenge, and he and Brooklyn followed the vet into the building and into the exam room. Cole stood back while Brooklyn relayed Marvin's symptoms, and the two of them went into the waiting room while Dr. Thorpe was his assistant, and who Cole quickly learned what was his wife, and then did an exam. He looked over at Brooklyn, who leaned back in the chair and her eyes closed. She looked exhausted, with circles under her eyes, swollen eyelids as she cried. "He's going to be okay," Cole reassured her. "He's in good hands now." She opened her eyes. "I know part of me is relieved that we're glad that we're here. The other part of me is now nervous for the diagnosis. Get some rest. You've been up all night, and it's nearly time for the sun to come up again." "I will once Dr. Thorpe has come out to talk to us." But she turned her weary head in his direction. "But thank you, Cole. You moved heaven and earth to get us here. I can never repay you. You're a good man." Cole flushed under her praise, but the words rang in his ears. The ones were calling him a good man. He was a successful man, a relatively smart man, a very rich man, but he wasn't sure he'd ever been called, quote-unquote, good. And the compliment went straight to his heart. He wanted to be a good man, and more accurately, he wanted to be a good man for her. Wasn't life just full of surprises? Of course, that's page 156. What I have to say to that really quickly, when I read that page, one of my favorite country singers is Chris Young, and he has this song, "I want to be a good man." And anyway, I don't remember the rest of the words, but that song automatically popped into my head, and I was like, Cole is trying to be a good man for Brooklyn, clearly. He's trying to go above and beyond to not only help out Marvin the dog, which is Brooklyn's, but he's also trying to prove to her that he's wanting that trust. Remember, she questioned in the beginning about trust? Trust is such a big thing. Page 162. A few short weeks ago, he'd come to the island with all intentions of getting her to sell her house. Now he was snuggled up next to her after they weathered a hurricane together, and he single-handedly saved her best friend. Because if they hadn't gotten Marvin prompt attention, the outcome might have been very different. She had pegged him as an entitled, spoiled, rich jerk, but he hadn't borne the initial impression. Indeed, he was a caring and funny and generous. And boy, did he know how to kiss. That was page 162. It's funny how sometimes we can make first impressions of people before really getting to know them. And sometimes those first impressions aren't the actual impression of that person, and the person gets judged wrong. Brooklyn's starting to realize, hey, you know what? Cole is not the guy that I thought he was. And I judged him wrongly. Okay, moving forward. Where did I mark this page? Okay, these two are fighting now. I think. There's a fight involved, so I have to figure out if that's the fight or not. Hold on a second. Give me a moment. I had this idea. Oh, she's telling him about her first impressions. I had this idea of who you were. This is page 165. Especially after some of the things you said at first about working hard, playing hard, and offering to buy me out without batting an eye at the price, and you're in your mid-30s, not married, no girlfriend you mentioned. I had this image in my head of a playboy, but that isn't being born out of your behavior. His smile widened. Oh, I'm glad. His hand was still on her arm, and his thumb made little circles. She wasn't even sure he knew he was doing it. Here's the thing, Brooklyn. I did work hard and play hard for a lot of years, but things changed after my heart scare, and I've been trying so hard to be like my dad in some ways, and unlike him in others. I wanted to follow in his footsteps at Abbott, but I was sure determined to stay away from the marriage scene. Since he and my mother barely spoke, and in the end he died a young man because he was a workaholic. That is not a path I'd like to follow. Do you feel like you've let him down somehow by slowing down or adjusting your priorities? His eyes widened in acknowledgement. Man, you hit the nail on the head. I do. Abbott Industries was everything to him. He was so damn good at it. I made a different choice on one level, and I know it was the right one, but I still haven't quite moved past the idea that I failed or something. There's nothing wrong with searching for some kind of balance in life or getting off the hamster wheel. Intellectually, I know that. I guess, he halted, looked down, and lifted his gaze again. I've always been looking for approval. My parents didn't have a good marriage, certainly not over lovingly, and I'm an only child. It always seemed like Dad's hopes were pinned on me. There was never any question of me not taking over the business. It was just a matter of when. My hair is driving me crazy tonight, kids. Sorry. I know that's not in the book. Anyway, this is page 167. He smiled a little bit, and I went through a stage where I wanted to be a football quarterback, then one where I thought I should have been in a rock band. But seriously, no, I love the company. I just want to see it succeed. And yet, his voice trailed away, and Brooklyn reached out to touch his cheek. What is it? Dad was a workaholic in an unworkable marriage. I don't want that for myself. So I've never been much for relationships. I mean, that's just setting myself up for failure, isn't it? And I'm desperately trying to find the right balance so I can keep Abbott strong enough to withstand the economy without putting myself in the hospital. Good thing you don't have high expectations of yourself then, she quipped and smiled. That's a lot of pressure on one person. I have a lot of responsibilities. And because Brooklyn didn't quite get that, because she had deliberately set her own life up to be simple. Page 168. Here's where the two opposites really come out, and you see that magnet force putting them together. Perhaps too simple, really. She loved the island, but was it enough to keep her through all her days? When Cole arrived on the island, she wanted nothing more than to keep everything exactly the same. But that was reasonable. Staying exactly the same meant she'd never be married or have children of her own. She'd live alone in her grandparents' house, and what? Knit for the rest of her life? What is it, Cole asked? You suddenly look very sad. Nothing really. I'm just realizing how life carries us along with it no matter what we plan. I'm trying to see how far ahead I'm to read here. Oh, good gravy. And we're going to be reading for a little bit, so take a deep seat. Before he could ask what she meant, her phone buzzed. Grateful for the interruption, she rolled over and retrieved it from the table beside the bed. Dr. Thorpe sent through a photo of Marvin, who was awake and apparently very groggy. Power's on, for real, and Marvin's awake. He punctured it with a smiley face. Look, she said, rolling back, showing the screen. Marvin's loopy but conscious. She felt so relieved and lightheaded with it again. Thank you so much. Turns out that this all worked out okay for me, he said softly, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. I'm here with you, aren't I? Page 169. And yet his words were not about wanting a relationship. Still echoed. Brooklyn struggled to find what was happening between them. They were neighbors, friends. She wasn't exactly poor, but she had a very modest existence next to his lavish one. He had a very high-powered career. She made a small living out of what had been a hobby. Their lives intersected in one small way, being on the island at the same time. But that was about it. So what did she want from this moment? Right now in a hotel room, it wasn't sex. Not that she didn't think about it. It would be spectacular because after what they had shared on the beach, which was just making out, sure, there would be fireworks, but it would also make her incredibly vulnerable, and she wasn't ready for that. Not when there was no future in it. Cole, don't say it. I can see it on your face, and it's okay. Let's just get up, order some food, and figure out what's going to be next. He wasn't going to push. She appreciated and respected him for that. She was also a little disappointed in herself. Why was it so hard to reach out and take the opportunity before her? Her throat tightened. The answer was simple. Page 170. But not certainly easy to acknowledge. The truth was, one afternoon out of her lifetime had changed everything. It made her seek guarantees, and in absence of guarantees, she couldn't bring herself to take chances. And that was okay, wasn't it? Everyone made choices based on their past experiences. After all, Cole had made several choices based on his upbringing and his father's death. He'd just said so. Moreover than the guarantee she wanted from him that he would leave the property alone, and he'd essentially done that already. So she smiled as Cole rolled off the bed and reached out for the in-room dining room menu. And in the matter of hours, she'd be taking Marvin back home and life would get back to normal, wouldn't it? And despite her recent, quote, is this all there is, end quote, thoughts, she was at least happy that she had the power to make those decisions and choices for herself. Cole ordered up a feast of brunch of foods, omelets, home fries, bacon, crisp, a fruit platter with ripe berries, grapes, melon, pastries, and a lot of coffee. When their bellies were full, they ventured outside to a mile-long beach and listened to the pounding surf fled over the storm. The sun had come out, but there was a mess of driftwood seawood strewn behind on the normally pristine white sand. Page 171. The crisp breeze was invigorating, and when they returned to the resort, they had learned from the staff that power was slowly being restored across the province. The island was sure to be without, but she could manage with the generator. The generator! In her haste last night, she'd forgotten to start it up at the house. Now it had been 24 hours, and her fridge and freezer were sure to be thawed. Damn it! All the food would be wasted. When she said as much to Cole, he frowned and fired off a text to Dan. It's too late, she lamented. Dan can't do anything, Cole. It should have been done this first thing this morning at the latest. I was planning on returning home this morning and starting it up if the power wasn't back on. But Cole merely smiled and handed over his phone. Thought of it. Went to the house this morning. Damage is minimal. Generator's working fine. We'll refuel it tonight. She stared at the screen. Dan did that? Apparently, see, nothing to worry about. It had been so long since she'd relied on anyone, or even someone, to look after her welfare. Page 172. She wasn't sure what to say. Have you checked your email or anything? She shook her head. No, I've been trying to save the battery. Indeed, her phone was down to 32%, and my data. I was going to check mine back in the room. He looked down at her and took her hand in his. The wind was so cool in the aftermath of the storm. The tropical humidity had gone from the air, leaving a distinctive fall feeling behind. I'm sure they'll have charge cords at the desk. Unless you want to go home tonight, I can put Dave on standby. She hadn't even thought of Dave. Oh my gosh, is he still at the airstrip? Cole chuckled. No, I sent him back to Halifax just after you went back to sleep. Whenever we need him, he can be here in a few hours if you want to go back home tonight. They could go back to the island. She could always return for Marvin with a boat tomorrow. It would be a rough sailing, but the seas would be calmer than today. Or they could stay at the resort tonight and take Marvin home tomorrow if he was ready. It would mean spending the night with Cole. I've got the room for tonight anyway, Brooklyn, so it's entirely up to you. There was only one bed. It was a giant one, but... Page 173. Cole sighed and looked out over the water. Brooklyn wasn't sure what to make of this dejected sound. Was he frustrated with her? With the situation? It's entirely up to you, she offered. You've been so kind already. I will work around whatever it is you want. He didn't look at her. What I want is you. I already told you that once before, so keep that in mind when you decide if you want to go home tonight or if you want to stay. Then he turned his head to look at her. I want you, Brooklyn, even if it's just for one night only. That was it, then. He wasn't still looking for a relationship or anything more than a fling. The only thing left to decide was if she was still willing to accept one night in his bed, or if she would protect her heart and her body and do the safe and sensible thing. Okay, 179. We're getting there. Fork in hand, Brooklyn met his gaze. I think your speed is more like the Plaza, or what's the other one in New York, the Waldorf Astoria? She was so adorable. He wished he could take her there. Maybe he could. He had to go back to Manhattan soon. He couldn't avoid the Abbott office forever. What if she went with him for a taste of the Big Apple? You've never been to New York, have you? She shook her head. I've never been much of anywhere. She popped half a sprout into her mouth and closed her eyes. Oh, wow. I don't even like Brussels sprouts, and this is delicious. Not even bitter at all. He tried one, and the flavor exploded on his tongue. You know, he said. He swallowed the first bite. I'm really no different in New York than I am here. Maybe more relaxed, I suppose, but the same person. I don't go through a personality change. She nodded. I'm glad to hear it. Still, this isn't the life you're used to. Maybe it's better. Where did that thought come from? She laughed. Page 180. Do you really think so? It's a different lifestyle here. Slower, yes, but don't you miss? I mean, the theater, the restaurants, and whatever else you usually do? You mean work in my office until 9 p.m.? Hate to break it to you, Brooklyn, but the last night playing cards and having a few drinks, I don't remember when I had that much fun. He lifted his glass. So why don't we toast to simpler lives and happy times? She raised her glass and touched the rim to his eyes, and his eyes were glowing in the mellow light from the nearby lamp. They took a sip. And to Marvin, she added. He grinned, of course. They drank again, and to making the best of bad situations, he finished, because a private dinner for two and a heck of a nice way to spend the day after a hurricane. Cole, eat, he said softly. Honestly, I don't care if we watch a movie and raid the snacks in the minibar. I'm just happy to be spending the evening with you, Brooklyn. That and much was at least 100% true. This man, I'm telling you, he's enough to make a girl's heart go pitter-patter. And he's telling her even though he wants her, he's not going to force himself on her, which is wonderful. Moving on. Page 208. Her friends would tell her she was crazy not to take a chance. They still believed in the fairy tale. But there was no security in those sorts of dreams, those sorts of crazy dreams. If nothing else, Brooklyn considered herself a realist. I didn't realize you thought so little of me, he said, resting his elbows on his knees. And I thought you knew me better. I shared stuff about myself that I don't generally share with people. And I thought you understood. So if you think me asking you is because you're a challenge, you don't know me at all. Her heart hurt, hearing the disappointment in his voice. I would never fit into your life, she added, less angry now and more sad and practical. We're from two different worlds, Cole. I'd be unhappy. I just know it. This is where I belong. Page 209. I never said I wanted you to leave the island just to give us a chance, Brooklyn. I've never felt this way about anyone. You make me laugh, and you're the most genuine person I've ever met. I don't love you because you're a challenge. It's because you challenge me. And I need that. When I'm not with you, I think about being with you. I made a commitment to balance my life better, and I think you were meant to be part of that. Please give this a chance. I'm telling you, men like this only exist in books. The cramp in her chest went cold when he used the word love. Was it even possible? They'd only known each other a matter of weeks. Did he even realize what he said? This was all spiraling way too fast. Cole, that's a big thing to say after we spent one night together. Hurt flashed across his face. You surprise me. Yesterday we were walking in the beach together. We shared something amazing. I can only guess that you're running scared right now. And that's okay. Believe me, I'm scared, too. I think that the thing is, Brooklyn, I trust you. I believe that you're not interested in me because of my money. In fact, I think that point is working against me right now. She couldn't deny it. I won't fit in there, she said firmly, and you'd come to resent me. I shouldn't have let things get this far. That was page 209. She twisted her fingers together, 210. Knowing that what she had to say and hating it just the same. I shouldn't have slept with you knowing we didn't have any sort of future. Do you know, I wondered if you hadn't told me that you were leaving because you thought if you did, last night I would say no? Exactly the opposite, he said roughly. I didn't tell you because I was still sorting through my feelings, deciding what I wanted to do. Then I imagined you coming to visit me, see me in my world, and I thought, he ran his hand through his hair, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. You don't want to have anything to do with me in my world. You only want this island. You only want the island Cole who stays in your You only want the island Cole who stays in your life and be secure in your world and doesn't make you take any risk, right? She set back, hey. No, not hey. You basically just said I used a lie of omission to get you into bed, and I resent that a lot. We were friends, Brooklyn. At least I thought we were. We shared things with each other that I don't usually talk about often. Maybe you don't regret what happened last night, maybe you regret what happened last night, but I don't. My motives where you were concerned were pure. Can you say the same? Brooklyn bristled at that and pushed out of her chair, going to the veranda railing and clenching it at her fingers. They were impure, if that's what you're getting at. I wasn't angling for something. Weren't you? What happened? Did you decide to go for it because it was low risk? Because I was always going to be leaving? Or did you think I didn't care? Do you think I flew you and Marvin to the mainland so I could impress you with my money? I sincerely hope not. It was a way of helping a friend in need. Maybe I was wrong. I believed you thought better of me. This is page 211. Tears threatened now. He was hurt and angry, and she never wanted any of those things, except she realized the low-risk part, and that she never considered that he might be hurt by it. She hadn't considered his feelings because she got so caught up in what he was and not who he was. You're right, not about everything, but some things, and it shows that we aren't right for each other. I'm sorry, Cole. That's all I can say. I'm sorry. He sat for a moment in silence that followed, and then let out a long, slow sigh. Finally he stood and faced her, his hands shoved into his jean pockets. You disappoint me, Brooklyn. I'm surprised and disappointed. God of all things to say, those words gutted her. Page 212. She spent years trying to get over that feeling that she let people down. She dropped out of her degree. She stayed away from the relationships. She hidden herself away on the island because it was her happy place, but moreover, her safe place. And while there was nothing wrong with searching out safety and peace, she always felt that as if doing so, she somehow was disappointing those who meant the most to her. Cole stepped forward close enough that she had to look up to meet his gaze. Her insides trembled as he fixed his eyes on hers. You are so much more than you think. But you hide away so no one sees it. It feels like you're building your life here is a solution. But really, it's just a way of avoiding dealing with what happened to you. And all I can say that because of some things I did when my dad died, and again during my own health scare, his voice gentled and he lifted one hand to touch her cheek. It's the difference between avoiding life and embracing it. I decided to stop running a few days ago when I accepted my feelings for you, but I can't force you to make that same decision. You have to do it on your own time. Maybe you never will. He dropped his hand, backed away. I'll be going in a couple days. Dan and Raylene will be here until after the holiday. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask them. Goodbye, Brooklyn. She couldn't answer, not even to say goodbye. She was too dumbstruck, too floored by what he'd said. Every instinct within her wanted to shout that he was wrong, that moving here was embracing life, the kind of life she wanted. But deep down she knew that was a lie. He'd seen it, and he called her out on it. Fine, maybe hiding away here on the island wasn't the right thing, but it didn't mean jetting off to New York City was the answer either. Brooklyn watched him go until he was out of sight and out of the end of the lane, and then she went back inside. Marvin was still asleep on his bed and looked around at her little house. She loved it. She did feel safe here, but even with Marvin for company it was lonely, especially now that Cole was gone for good. Page 213, if I hadn't said that before. Tears stung her eyes, but she rubbed them away, and she wasn't going to cry over Cole Abbott and his hurtful words. and she definitely wasn't going to cry over the decision she made. She was a strong woman despite what Cole said, and that meant she'd get over him too. Page 226. This is a mom and a son discussion. The mom has come clean and told the son that she's getting married to the divorce attorney that she's been in love with from the word go. Even the father knew that she loved the divorce attorney, but they married anyway, and they were in a loveless marriage, and she was sorry that it affected Cole in a harsh manner. That's basically what they've said. Page 226. You're a better son than I deserve, but I'm not going to say no. Thank you, darling. I'll call you in a few days. She moved forward as if to buss his cheek, but she hugged him too. An awkward thing, but welcome just the same. Thank you, she whispered back and stepped back. Don't give up on her, Cole. Don't give up on her if you love her, Cole. It's a rare thing. This is page 227. At least try to talk to her again and listen to what she has to say. He walked her to the door and said goodbye, and then went back to the sofa and sat down. He put his head into his hands and sighed. He missed Brooklyn. He loved her, and he wasn't sure how to go about fighting for her. How could he leave Abbott behind forever? It was a huge responsibility, but one he wanted. It motivated him to get up in the morning, gave him a purpose. He'd been on the island for a month, and then he'd be bored out of his mind and miserable. His mother had just shown him what happened to a person who was miserable in their life. And yet living without Brooklyn was a painful thought, and he could see no way to do both. Brooklyn had been very clear about her needs, but he also didn't want her to be the reason she ventured into a life that she didn't want and was unhappy. Maybe she was right. Maybe they were from two different worlds and that couldn't be reconciled, but damn it, it hurt. Page 230 and 231. Raylan watched him go. He's mad at you for breaking Cole's heart. Brooklyn gasped at her. Breaking his heart? I don't think I'm capable of that. Oh, I think you are. Raylan's eyebrows shot up as she spoke. He'd really fallen for you. Brooklyn opened her mouth to protest, but Raylan's hand held a hand up. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that was the result. Brooklyn didn't know what to say. She finally sighed and said, We're too different. It would never work. Really? Too different? I can't see how. Brooklyn made a sound that was a half scoff, half disbelief. Come on, Raylan. Look at his life. Look at mine. He's a freaking billionaire. And I'm a thousandaire. That's about the size of my savings account. Raylan laughed. Oh, for Pete's sake. That's just money. That's all window dressing. It's in here that counts. She pressed a hand to her chest. I've known Cole a while now, and I've never seen him light up the way he did with you. Or laugh. Maybe he needs someone like you. You ground him in a way bank accounts and employees never can. Brooklyn, you need him too. I do? Raylan met her gaze unevenly. You're hiding away here. He can pull you out of that fear and uncertainty. And why shouldn't you enjoy some of the finer things? She raised an eyebrow. It won't change you, if that's what you're worried about. You're just too stubborn. Page 232. Brooklyn choked back a laugh, but she kept thinking of what Raylan had said about Cole lighting up. She lit up too, every time he'd walk into a room or into her front yard. Cole is stuck up. Cole is not stuck up. If anything, he's crying out for love. He didn't have much as a kid, as far as I can tell. He's had a lot of advantages, but just not that. And yet, he's the one who's giving most people I know accepting nothing in return. Brooklyn knew well enough. She tried to wire money for the hotel and the vet to bill him. He refused the transfer. She thought it was because he was still angry with her, but now she wondered if there was more to it than that. I hurt him, and I didn't mean to. We know that. Despite Dan's attitude, we both know that. But we also think you made a big mistake turning him away when you could take a chance on him. On you as a couple. Silence fell for a few minutes. They listened to the crash of waves and the wind and the plaintive wail of gulls soaring overhead. It was cold, and Brooklyn shoved her hands into her jacket pockets before her fingers turned numb. I'm afraid, finally she said. We're all afraid of something, Raylan answered. Her voice was steady and sure. Page 233. Every damned one of us. We can either let out our fear rule us, or we can reach out for what we want and deserve it in spite of it. Something made you quit, Brooklyn. Something made you warp yourself in something comfortable and familiar, and that's okay for a while. But don't you want more? Don't you want love and excitement of the best kind, the surprises in life? Tears prickled the back of Brooklyn's eyes. It was basically what Cole had said to her, but without the blaze of hurt and rejection behind it. That she was avoiding life and playing it safe and giving up opportunities for something wonderful. Because in all of her life there'd never been anything as wonderful as Cole being in her arms. Could she do it? Could she go to him and ask for another chance? Could she handle a place as big as chaotic as New York when even now she found going into unfamiliar places difficult? She wanted to believe she could, but even now panic threaded through her cold and tight. I can't leave Marvin, she said. Oh, good heavens, you don't even sound convincing when you say that. She pointed at Dan, who was tugging out of the stick as Marvin mouthed. We'll take care of him. We're staying here for at least another month. Brooklyn's heart started to pound as she actually considered going to New York, fighting her demons along the way. I don't know if my passport is still valid. Page 234. Well, that might be a barrier. You should probably check. Raylan was smiling now, her eyes glowing. And we'll watch the house for you too, whatever you need. Raylan, I don't know what to say. I'm still terrified, but I think I need to go at least try, you know. She swallowed against a lump in her throat. I've been miserable this whole time he left. He's a good man, and he loves you. There's nothing in life that's guaranteed, but please don't miss out on what could be wonderful because you're afraid to take another chance. Raylan nodded toward Dan. Trust me, the rewards can be more than you ever dreamed. Someday Brooklyn wanted to hear the story of Raylan and Dan, but right now she had some arrangements to make. She reached out and put her hand on Raylan's forearm. Can you help me with the details? I don't even know where to find him. Now Raylan's grin was wide. Oh, yes, you find your passport, and then come to the house, and we'll get everything arranged, and I'll help. Brooklyn called for Marvin and looked at Raylan as a fizz of excitement started to run through her veins. Why are you so determined to set us up? Oh, honey, because Cole is a great boss, but the few days before he left, I don't want to be stuck with that guy as my employer. He needs some Brooklyn sunshine in his life. Stat! This is page 235. Brooklyn grinned, then hooked Marvin up to his leash and knocked against her knees. Her tongue was... Brooklyn grinned, then hooked Marvin up to his leash. Once he knocked up against her knees, tongue out and happy. The dog. Okay, I was getting confused there. Thank you, Raylan. I'll come back to the house when I found my passport. Dan came up behind the dune, behind Marvin. All good, he asked. Better than good. Raylan went to him and tilted her head up for a kiss. We're going to go dog sit. And that was the last paperclip. So does this couple wind up happily ever after? The only way to find out is read the book. And what does this book get as a rating? After all those moments shared and those wonderful moments of facing their fears head on, if you will, in their own way, it gets a 15. 15. So that's a must read. So there's your rating. There's your book review. I'm feeling under the weather again tonight. I'm taking a night off the workout, but I've been very good at trying to go back to the workout. But I know how sick I have been too, so I have to pace myself. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. God bless.